The sun rose over Heartland, but something felt wrong. A quiet chill swept through the ranch, as if the land itself sensed a loss too heavy to carry. Today, the Bartlett-Fleming family would face a moment that would change their lives forever. And it all began with Tim Fleming's final ride. A ride that no one knew would be his last. Tim Fleming always pushed himself a little too far, and on this day, he did it again. He had spent the morning training a spirited young horse at Big River, trying to break through with the same determination that defined his entire life. The sky above him was clear, the kind of blue that made the world feel wide and full of promise. Tim believed he had one more run in him before heading home. Maybe he wanted to prove something to the horse, to himself, or maybe to the ghosts of his past. No one would ever know for sure as he tightened the saddle and stepped into the stirrup. The horse snorted and stamped its feet, full of nervous energy, but Tim only smiled. He had handled tougher horses and tougher days. He clicked his tongue, guiding the horse into a steady trot along the open field. For a few peaceful minutes, everything felt normal. The wind brushed against his face, the ground moved steady beneath him, his worries faded into the distance. But then the horse sensed something unseen. A sudden rustle from the trees made it jolt sideways. Tim tried to steady it, pulling gently on the reins, but the horse's fear grew stronger. It reared up sharply, its hooves striking the air. Tim's grip slipped. His balance shifted. Time seemed to slow as he began to fall. He hit the ground harder than anyone could survive. Dust rose around him, settling in the silence that followed. The horse trembled nearby but stayed still, as if it understood what had just happened. Minutes later, a ranch hand saw the horse alone in the distance, riderless. He ran toward Tim and dropped to his knees, shouting his name, shaking him, hoping for any sign of life, but Tim didn't move. By the time emergency responders arrived, the truth was already clear. Tim Fleming's long, complicated, unforgettable journey had come to an end. He had died doing what he loved, working with horses. But the shock of his loss would soon tear through Heartland like a storm, touching every life he had ever been part of. This was the moment everything changed. And the people who loved him most had no idea that their world was already breaking. The phone rang at Heartland just as the morning chores were beginning. Amy was brushing Spartan, thinking about nothing more serious than the day's training schedule. But the moment she heard the sharp, urgent tone of her phone, something inside her tightened. She didn't know why, but her hands froze in mid-brush. Spartan flicked his ears, sensing the sudden shift in her mood. Amy wiped her hands on her jeans and picked up the phone. The voice on the other end was shaky, almost too soft to understand. But a few words cut through her like ice. "It's Tim. There's been an accident." At first, her mind refused to process it. Maybe she heard wrong? Maybe this was a mistake. But the voice kept talking to many details. Too many facts she didn't want to hear. A fall. No pulse. Too late? Her breath slipped away from her, leaving her chest hollow and tight. The brush fell from her hand and clattered against the barn floor. Spartan stepped closer, nudging her shoulder gently, as if trying to bring her back from wherever her mind had gone. But Amy couldn't move. She couldn't even blink. All she could hear was the final sentence spoken on the phone. "I'm so sorry, Amy. Tim is gone." Jack was walking toward the barn when he saw Amy standing completely still, her phone hanging loosely at her side. One look at her face told him everything. He didn't ask. He didn't speak. He simply wrapped his arms around her as she collapsed into him, shaking with silent tears. Jack's eyes burned with grief, but he held her firmly, trying to be the strength she needed, even while his own heart cracked open. Inside the house, Lisa heard the commotion and hurried outside. The moment she saw Amy folded into Jack's arms, she stopped in her tracks. She didn't need an explanation. She covered her mouth, fighting back a wave of sorrow. Heartland had known loss before, but this one felt different. Tim had been stubborn, loud, frustrating, and impossible. But he was family, and family leaves a hole no one else can fill. Lou found out only minutes later. Through a frantic call from Amy, she was in her New York office, surrounded by papers and plans. When her sister's trembling voice broke through the noise of her busy day, The moment Amy whispered the words, "Dad is gone," Lou sank into her chair as the world around her blurred. Tears streamed down her face, falling onto her desk. She had missed so much time with him, time she always promised she'd make up later. But later was gone. Across miles, across heartbreak. The same realization hit them all. Everything had changed in a single moment. Heartland had lost its storm, its fighter, its flawed but fiercely loyal Tim Fleming. This was the call that broke them, and the first step toward a reunion none of them wanted, but all of them needed. Lou booked the first flight she could find, her hands trembling as she typed. The airport felt unreal, like she was moving through a world made of glass sharp, fragile, ready to shatter with every step. People rushed around her, laughing, talking, living their normal lives, while her own life had frozen at the words, "Dad is gone." She sat by the window at the departure gate, staring out at the planes lined up like silver ghosts. The guilt in her chest pressed harder with every passing minute. She had been planning to visit Heartland soon, she always said soon. But now soon had slipped away forever. Her last conversation with Tim replayed in her mind. He had teased her about overworking again, and she had brushed him off with a quick goodbye. She thought there would be time for a real talk, a proper visit. Another chance? Now, there were no more chances. When Lou boarded the plane, she pressed her forehead against the cold window. Her reflection stared back at her, tired, grief-stricken, lost. She whispered, "I should have been there. I should have tried harder." The engines roared to life and the plane lifted off the ground, carrying her toward a home filled with memories of a father she would never see again. As the clouds swallowed the sky, Lou felt her heart sink deeper. Images of her childhood with Tim flickered in her mind, his proud smile when she learned to ride. The arguments that ended with stubborn apologies. The moments of advice he offered even when she didn't want to hear it. Their relationship was never simple, but it was real. And now that he was gone, every rough edge felt precious. Hours later, when the plane finally touched down in Calgary, she didn't rush off like everyone else. She sat still, breathing slowly, holding on to the last quiet moment before facing the heartbreak waiting at the ranch. She knew she had to be strong for Amy, for Jack, for the whole family. But right now, she wasn't strong at all. She was just a daughter grieving the father she never expected to lose. Outside the airport doors, the wind hit her hard, carrying a cold bite that reminded her of home. She closed her eyes, letting the weight of everything settle deep inside her. The drive to Heartland would be long. Every mile would bring back memories. She wasn't sure she was ready to face, but she stepped forward anyway, because love, even broken and unfinished, pulls you home. And Heartland was waiting. The day of the funeral arrived with a sky heavy enough to cry. A thin layer of clouds drifted over the foothills, soft and gray, as if the world itself had lowered its voice out of respect. People moved quietly across the Heartland property, their steps slow, their eyes full of disbelief. It didn't feel like a normal gathering. It felt like the land was mourning one of its own. A large white tent had been set up near the old barn, Tim's favorite place to argue, teach, and joke. Inside, rows of chairs waited for everyone who loved him, though no number of seats could hold the full weight of his memory. At the very front rested a closed wooden casket. A framed photograph sat beside it, Tim smiling in the sun, hat pushed back, eyes bright with stubborn pride. The sight alone was enough to make hearts crack open. Amy arrived first, walking slowly, almost as if each step strained against an invisible wall. Spartan followed behind her, tied gently to a post. She didn't want him far today. He had been there through storms and heartbreak, and now she needed the quiet strength of his presence more than ever. When Amy reached the casket, she touched the wood with trembling fingers. No words came, only a breath that broke halfway out of her chest. Jack stood nearby, his posture straighter than usual, but his eyes were tired in a way only deep sorrow can carve. He kept glancing toward the road, waiting for the rest of the family. He had promised himself he would hold it together. For Amy, for Lou, for everyone who needed him. But every time he saw that photo of Tim, Memories rushed in of a young man full of fire, of second chances, of mistakes forgiven and not forgotten. Lisa approached silently and slipped her hand into Jack's. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Sometimes grief speaks loudest in the spaces between words. Then came a ripple of motion cars pulling up, doors opening. Figures stepping out dressed in black, friends, neighbors, old rodeo buddies who had fought and laughed with Tim in younger, wilder days. Some removed their hats, holding them against their chests as they stared at the casket. Unable to believe this was really the end of Tim's long, stubborn fight with life. And then Lou arrived. The moment she stepped out of the car, the entire atmosphere shifted. Just when the funeral tent began to fill with quiet whispers and soft footsteps, a distant engine sounded along the gravel road leading to Heartland. At first, no one paid much attention. People were still arriving, after all. But Amy, standing near the corner of the tent, felt something tighten inside her chest, an instinct, a shift in the air. As if the moment itself was holding its breath, a small car stopped near the ranch gate. The door opened slowly, and a pair of worn riding boots touched the ground. Then, a familiar figure stepped out, her hair pulled back, her posture tense with emotion she was trying to control. Georgie? She had flown in without telling anyone, leaving behind competitions, training schedules, and everything that had been keeping her busy for months. The moment she received the news, nothing else mattered. She needed to be here not as a distant rider chasing dreams across the world, but as a daughter, a sister, and a piece of Tim's complicated family. As she walked toward the tent, her pace quickened, as if each step brought the truth closer and heavier. Her eyes searched the crowd until they found Amy. For a second, Georgie stopped, frozen with grief she didn't know how to express. But Amy was already moving toward her when they reached each other. Georgie fell into Amy's arms, hugging her with a force that came from deep inside, a place where love and loss collide. Amy held her tightly, stroking her back, whispering, "You're home. It's okay, you're home." But the words trembled, because nothing felt okay. Not really. Jack watched from a short distance, his face softening. Seeing Georgie arrive brought him a quiet sense of relief, as if a missing part of the family had finally returned. He walked forward slowly, and when Georgie pulled away from Amy, she saw him standing there. She rushed into his arms, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, Jack. I'm so sorry I wasn't here sooner." Jack wrapped her in a steady embrace. "You're here now," he whispered. "That's what matters." Georgie's eyes then shifted to the wooden casket. Her breath caught in her throat. She approached it with careful steps, as though afraid her sadness might shatter the silence around it. She laid a hand on the smooth surface, closing her eyes. Memories flooded into him, cheering for her during early jumping lessons. His rough encouragement, his stubborn belief in her. Even when she doubted herself, she whispered, "Thank you for everything you did, even the hard things." Her voice cracked, but she didn't pull away. Around her, people watched with wet eyes, moved by the sight of this strong young woman carrying so much sorrow in her small frame. Her return wasn't planned, but it felt destined. Tim would have wanted her here. Heartland needed her here. And in that moment, Georgie realized something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. This ranch, this family, this place of aching love and lingering memories, was still her home. After the funeral service, when most guests drifted toward the house for quiet conversations and warm food they barely tasted, Amy slipped away. Her heart felt heavy, and the noise around her only made the weight harder to carry. She needed air. She needed space. She needed the one place where Tim's presence still lingered like a shadow that refused to fade. The barn, its familiar scent, hay, dust and old wood wrapped around her the moment she stepped inside. The world outside softened to a distant hum, leaving only the muted creak of the rafters above her. She walked slowly down the aisle, running her fingers along the stalls, as if touching them might somehow bring her closer to him. Then she saw it. On the workbench near the back of the barn lay a small, scovered envelope. It hadn't been there the day before. Someone must have placed it there recently, or maybe it had been hidden beneath tools until now. Either way, its presence chilled her. She stepped closer, her eyes fixed on the handwriting across the front. For my girls. The letters were unmistakably Tim's, bold, uneven, full of stubborn personality he never managed to tame. Amy's breath caught. Her hands shook as she reached for the envelope, the paper rough beneath her fingers. She hesitated, fearing the words inside would break her even more, or heal her in ways she wasn't ready for. Finally, she opened it. Inside was a single folded page, worn and smudged like Tim had rewritten it more than once. Amy unfolded it carefully, her eyes scanning the first lines. As she read, tears welled in her eyes. Tim wrote about his regrets, the mistakes he had made with both Amy and Lou. The years wasted on anger and pride, the times he should have stayed instead of walking away. But woven through his honesty was something deeper. Love. A love he had struggled to show, but had always felt fiercely. He wrote about how proud he was of Amiov, the woman she became. The horses she healed, the strength she carried even when she didn't see it herself. And for Lou, he apologized for the pressure he had put on her, the expectations he had never learned to soften. He told her he admired her leadership more than she would ever know. Near the end of the letter, one line stood out, written more carefully than the rest. Take care of each other. Forgive me for the years I can't fix. And keep Heartland alive. For all of us. Kami pressed the letter to her chest, her body shaking as the weight of his final words settled inside her. She sank onto a nearby hay bale, letting the tears fall freely. For the first time since the accident, she didn't feel alone in her grief. Tim had reached out from beyond the silence, leaving behind a piece of himself to guide them forward. When she finally rose, she folded the letter gently and tucked it close, as if protecting a fragile thread that connected her to the father she had just lost. She knew she had to share it with Lou, with Georgie, with Jack. The family needed it as much as she did. As she stepped out of the barn, the late afternoon light broke through the clouds, casting a soft glow over the ranch. Maybe it was sunlight. Maybe it was Tim's final gift. The sun had begun to set by the time the family gathered inside the main house. The funeral day had drained every drop of energy from them, leaving a quiet heaviness in the air. Yet something felt different now, softer, warmer. Amy stood near the window, Tim's letter held carefully in her hands. Lou and Georgie sat close together at the table, their eyes still swollen from hours of crying. Jack leaned against the counter, silent but steady. As always, when Amy finally spoke, her voice carried a fragile strength. "I found something in the barn," she said, holding up the envelope. The room shifted. Every heartbeat seemed to slow. Lou straightened in her chair, her breath catching as she recognized the handwriting. Georgie stared wide-eyed. Even Jack's expression cracked for a moment, his face softening with the pain he had tried so hard to control. Amy unfolded the letter and read it aloud. Tim's words filled the room like a ghost, gently sitting beside them. Every apology, every memory, every confession of love struck deeper than the last. Lou covered her mouth, tears spilling again as the lines reached her. Georgie held onto her sleeve, grounding herself as her heart shook. Jack turned away, wiping at his eyes quickly. But not quickly enough. By the time Amy reached the final lines, "Keep Heartland alive." For all of us, the room was silent except for soft, trembling breaths. The letter didn't erase the pain. It didn't fix the years that had been messy and imperfect. But it brought something they desperately needed: connection. A reminder that even in his hardest moments, Tim had cared more deeply than he ever managed to say aloud. Lou rose from her chair and walked to Amy, pulling her into a tight embrace. "We're going to be okay," she whispered, though her voice shook with emotion. "We'll make sure of it." Georgie joined them, wrapping her arms around both sisters. Their grief, heavy as it was, bound them together instead of breaking them apart. When Jack stepped forward and joined the embrace, the circle felt complete a family. Bruised but not broken. Later, as the sky faded into a soft, peaceful blue, the four of them stepped outside. The ranch stretched before them, quiet and familiar. The barn glowed under the last light of the day. Spartan stood calmly in the pasture, his ears flicking toward them as if sensing the shift in the air. Amy walked to the fence and placed Tim's hat found earlier in the barn, gently on the post. She whispered, "We'll take it from here, Dad." The breeze lifted her words and carried them across the fields. Weaving them into the land he loved, Lou took a deep breath. Feeling something inside her finally settle, Georgie reached for her hand. Jack rested a comforting arm around Amy's shoulders. They didn't know what tomorrow would bring. They didn't know how long the pain would last. But tonight, for the first time since Tim's death, they felt a small spark of hope, quiet, fragile, but real. Because grief may break a family, but love is what puts the pieces back together. And at Heartland, love always finds a way.